Delighted to welcome everybody at the Trans-European Policy Studies Association conference here in Riga, just prior to Latvian presidency of the Council of the European Union. And of course, I am grateful that there are so many guests and so many participants today, and I am particularly grateful and expressing my thanks to the foreign guests for coming to Latvia, for coming to Riga, and absolutely enriching the debate on how we are moving forward with European Union, with our challenges and opportunities. I think Riga is now a very relevant place to debate European issues. We in Latvia tend to think that now all roads lead to Riga. Riga remains, until the end of 2014, the cultural capital of Europe. But of course, last but not least, Latvia will be the next new member which will take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union. And Latvia has been eager and enthusiastic to become one of the hubs of the political decision-making in the European Union just in a few weeks' time. Of course, it's sort of over-ambitious goal, but we have this enthusiasm about the presidency and our leadership and role in the presidency. But I think already during the presidency, but already before the presidency as well, we are very willing to become intellectual hub and platform of the know-how on how to deal with variety of the European challenges and opportunities. And not during the time of the presidency, but also beyond, because we speak about sustainable European Union. And I think some of the decisions made in Riga might influence how we proceed already later on with our common project. And absolutely, this is a project, be it today, be it during our presidency, or be it in general about the European Union. Of course, it's a project of like-minded. And we are here in Europe natural partners to discuss and to engage in intensive intellectual debate. The challenges we are facing are numerous, and they are both internal and external, and they are also interconnected. Grandmother no longer fertile and vibrant. These are the words by Pope Francis, of course, in European Parliament. And he also added that we are risking slowly losing our own soul. I actually believe the grandmother is still alive and still quite attractive. And I think it has a couple of strengths as well. So let's not sort of overstate the old age of the grandmother. And the attractiveness is shown by the countries in the neighborhood which are willing to join actually the project of European Union. But there is still a lot to aspire. Economic sustainability and institutional effectiveness within the EU would of course create more credibility about ourselves and within community, but also we would be more able to act as normative and attractive power externally, and also to stabilize the neighborhood. In the meantime, Ukrainian events and Russia's, I think, a number of definitions, adventurism, aggression, intervention, has been an additional wake-up call for promoting cohesion within the EU and projecting our values regionally and globally. And partnerships, of course, are must in the process. And this event is also a reflection of such partnerships. The event is organized by Latvian Institute of International Affairs, but in very close cooperation with our partners. With TEPSA, with Theseus Network, with very generous support by Fritz Thyssen Foundation. It has been very instrumental for organizing the venue and bringing so many people to Riga. But also thanks to our stakeholders here in Latvia, the European Commission representation, European Parliament Information Office. In the process, we've been quite intensively cooperating with a number of Latvian institutions, including Secretariat, which is in the charge of organizing the event in Riga, or events, to be more precise, during the presidency in Riga. But of course, this conference would be impossible without, again, so many participants willing to come to Riga to participate in an exchange of thoughts, and especially once more, the foreigners, our partners from European countries are very, very welcome. So once more, thank you. I wish you, and I think to all of us, a very productive venue and productive debate today and productive exchange of thoughts. So with this, I am finishing my introductory remarks, and I am happy to give the floor to Inga Skujiņa, who has been a tsar of European issues in a recent months and been the sort of central person in organizing things, and she's of course now the Deputy State Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but being very actively involved in organizing the all European presidency activities here in Riga. Inga, please, on priorities of Latvia, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Still a couple of words about grandma. I certainly belong to those, and I believe that Latvia is one of those countries being confident that grandma is still alive and energetic. To prove that, I have to say that Latvian presidency is going to be a hardworking and dynamic presidency. Well, our logo is there, and you know that this is a circular grindstone, and it always represents dynamism and energy. Also, responsible, pragmatic, and honest broker. This is another point to be mentioned about our presidency, well as a keywords. So, what is the context or challenges for our presidency? Well, we take up it against the backdrop of geopolitical and security challenges, be it next to the European borders or in a wider world. The second challenge that we see relates to the international situation in the European Union. Some economies are growing, some are in stagnation. There are unacceptable levels of unemployment. And the third challenge we see is the unity of the European Union, both vis-à-vis the third countries and internally. So, on this background, we consider that there are two overarching objectives. First of all, to fully overcome the economic and financial crisis. And second, to promote stability, security, and development in the world, of course, working hand in hand with the High Representative and the European External Action Service. So to reach those two objectives, we're going to concentrate on three themes: competitive Europe, digital Europe, and engaged Europe. First of all, on competitive Europe and digital Europe, the main actions. First and foremost, we're going to work in order to facilitate investment. As Mr. Juncker said a couple of days ago, the European Union is sending a new signal to the investors, a signal that Europe is determined to return to the path of growth. We welcome this significant move, and we're going to put all the effort in order to ensure effective Council's work on the investment plan for Europe. Second, we aim to fully exploit the digital potential in ensuring economic growth in the European Union. We would like to concentrate on promoting trust in the digital single market, both between the service providers and consumers, as well as remove barriers to cross-border trade and services. We will certainly pay particular attention to the safety in the digital environment, bringing forward such issues as data protection and cybersecurity. In general, Latvia believes that digital aspects should be promoted by default. In that context, we await the Commission's proposal for further action concerning the digital agenda, as well as the digital single market. Yesterday in Brussels, there was final agreement reached that next year, the very end of May, annual digital assembly will take place in Riga. An important action under the theme of competitiveness concerns the elaboration of the energy union. It will be our priority. We support the creation of a resilient energy union based on European energy security strategy and 2030 climate and energy framework. Of course, the three actions that I just mentioned, investment, the digital, and the energy union, are not the only ones the Latvian presidency is going to concentrate on. Certainly, we will have to focus and deal with such an issues as effective implementing of the European semester and renewed Europe 2020 strategy, mainstreaming industrial competitiveness, enhancing employment of the long-term unemployed, the youth and persons with disabilities. So you see that our hands are going to be full with different issues to be tackled during our presidency. So on Engaged Europe, main actions. As I said before, one of the main objectives of the Latvian presidency will be to promote stability, security, and development in the world, working hand in hand with the High Representative and the External Action Service. First of all, our neighborhood, be it south or to the east of the European Union. We will facilitate the review of the European neighborhood policy. During our presidency, we intend to pay particular attention to enhancing the EU cooperation with the Eastern Partnership countries. The fourth Eastern Partnership Summit in Riga next year, May 21st, 22nd, will provide the opportunity to evaluate the progress and to identify a new strategic guidance on further steps to be taken. We certainly want to reconfirm the importance of the Eastern Partnership in the European neighborhood policy based on the principles of differentiation and inclusiveness. Central Asia is another region of geostrategic importance. We will support the High Representatives and the External Action Service efforts to strengthening the EU engagement in Central Asia. There is a need to increase the EU visibility in the region and develop a comprehensive approach, enhancing cross-border ties, the border management, education exchanges, and strengthening economic ties. In June next year, European Council will focus and discuss the common security and defense policy. We will work hard again together with the High Representative, and that was discussed here in Riga a couple of weeks ago, to initiate review of the common security and defense policy, namely the European Strategic Strategy of 2003. I think this is the very important task ahead of us. Then last but not least, we also want to strengthen the transatlantic partnership, and notably by promoting conclusion of the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. There is not only economic but also geopolitical aspect to it. and we consider it becomes more and more visible and important. Yes, and certainly it is important to support every action directed to facilitate trade and create better opportunities for the EU companies in the third countries. These are just the main, so to say, priorities or probably main tasks to be addressed during our presidency. Each and every council has got its own work program, very detailed work program, and sometimes seems that, why it is so that for our first presidency we have got so many difficult files, so many difficult policies, and such a challenging background for our presidency. But, nevertheless, I think, as I said at the beginning, we're going to work hard, and with support from all of you, I hope we will have a successful presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Ms. Skujiņa for the outlining the Latvian priorities during Latvian presidency, and of course Ms. Skujiņa is from the executive branch, but we have also the representative from legislative branch, Lolita Čigāne, who is a member of Latvian Parliament and a chairwoman of the European Affairs Committee at the Latvian Parliament. Please, Lolita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sprūds. I am delighted to be participating and addressing your honorable audience. Just like the previous two speakers started with the reference to the old grandma, I will do too. And thinking about the European Union, I think there are definitely things that, more things that are new than things that are old. First of all, we have a new European Parliament, just recently elected, newly confirmed Commission, just recently happened. Also in Latvia, as a presidency country, we have a newly elected Parliament. Our election was just in October. We have newly formed legislative commissions and newly formed government. So a lot of new blood, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of new things to learn also for many people in Latvia. And some people ask me sometimes, given these conditions, given that Latvia is still relatively small and our public service is relatively new, are you ready for the presidency? And my answer is, yes, we are ready, because we prepared well and we have an excellent team. And I think that presidency is really a show of an excellent teamwork. And I think for that reason, it also shows the basic values of the European Union. We are not one leader or one personality based. We work together, we rotate our presidencies, we share the delights and burdens of the democratic decision making. Sometimes it's cumbersome, sometimes it's frustrating, but working all together on issues, not having one leader that says you should do this or that, but making decisions in really democratic forums is what makes us strong. And for that reason, I feel, yes, we are well prepared. I'm very happy to address you as a just for 3 weeks, I've been the chairperson of the European Affairs Committee, but I am very happy to share with you that the European Affairs Committee in Latvia is very influential. I've heard frustration from some national governments that they just stand aside and see how Europe is moving ahead and happening, that they feel disengaged, that they don't feel that they are part of this decision making. Happily, in Latvia, we have inherited so-called Danish model of parliamentary oversight. Our parliament confirms all the government's positions that go to the council meetings. So we are really engaged. We know about the policies, we participate, we discuss, and sometimes we even review and change some of the accents that our executive is offering us. So I think it's an excellent example that we are happy to share with other national parliaments too, specifically because there is a debate going on in the European Union of how to have national parliaments more engaged. Of course, we do have some shortcomings too. We are just very few. We are just 100 members, one chamber parliament, and sometimes we lack capacity and just simply time to really get very deep into the issues. So we are very happy with the presidency now. We've started confirming the mandates for council discussions on different policy areas that our colleague Inga Skujiņa already mentioned, and this allows us to go deep into issues of European Union policy making. And my belief is that that's the beauty of the presidency, of the rotating presidency, that you have this chance to really go deep into issues. So, not an old grandma, I would say, not at all. The last thing that I would like to just briefly address is the question of engaged Europe. Indeed, it is a very big issue, a big priority for us. And I would just like to refer to the High Representative Mogherini's words. She was visiting Riga just 2 weeks ago in conjunction with our presidency. And she said, we have too many crises happening at the same time. It's sometimes really, truly, humanely speaking, just sometimes seems a bit unbearable. We were just at the COSAC meeting of European Affairs committees in Rome during the Italian presidency. And we talked at length about the issues that the southern European countries are facing with the flow of refugees and the crisis that was precipitated by the events in Northern Africa. That's a huge challenge. At the same time, of course, we have the Ukraine situation with the Russian aggression towards an independent European state. So we do have a lot of challenges, but we have to deal with them in a way of solidarity, unity, and a balanced approach. One priority or one crisis should not overtake the others. In Latvia, of course, we will be focusing more on the Eastern Partnership issues, because we have expertise, we have our own experience, we have the legacy, and we understand those countries to the east of our borders very well. We understand Moldovans, and we are very happy that they made their pro-European choice. We very much understand Ukrainians. I, for instance, myself was in Ukraine as an election observer during the last two elections. And during the presidential election, we walked around the polling stations and people were saying, we are Europeans, we want to be where you are, and we want to confirm with this election our very clear European preference. We have to help our neighbors. And in that regard, I think that one of our priorities, the Eastern Neighborhood Policy and Eastern Partnership Summit that we will have, really has to revise the strategy and really give a very important signal to our neighbors, both in Moldova, Ukraine, and also in Georgia, that should they follow the reform and democratization path, they would have a prospect of closer integration to the EU. I think it's a very important incentive that Latvia received a long time ago. It has helped tremendously to develop our economy, to create jobs, and to become a modern democratic state. So I very much hope that we can give the same incentive and signal to our neighbors too. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Ms. Čigāne for a very dynamic speech and positive speech on Latvian presidency and the role also of the parliament in all of this. And I think we can just underline and add that I think it shows also that executive branch, legislative branch, and think tank community is very actively engaging each other and participating in a common project of moving forward with the EU presidency. But now it's a time for our foreign partners, for our TEPSA partners, and I'm happy to give the floor to Jaap de Zwaan, who is representing the TEPSA board and also coming originally from Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Please, Mr. Zwaan, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. In fact, after having heard the first speakers, I think we have already entered into a discussion on content substance. That's rightly so. And I also welcome the very enthusiastic presentation of the priorities of the presidency, as if you are in already for not 20 years, but if you are one of the founding fathers of this whole construction, European Union. I salute your enthusiasm and your ambitions as well. Just to make one step backwards, also for those who are not acquainted with TEPSA. So TEPSA is one of the organizing partners of this wonderful conference. TEPSA is a EU-wide framework of European institutes, Trans-European Policy Studies Association, and we are composed as an association of institutes originating of all the member states of the European Union. We welcome, of course, the membership of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and we have also quite a number of associated members, which are interesting institutes, either in the member states or in associated countries. And why not? We have to take a look to the East, the Eastern Partnership connection. Could be, they are not as yet involved, but that could be something, an objective for the future. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, TEPSA has a long tradition in organizing conferences like these ones, pre-presidency, just to take a look at priorities of the EU, your own ideas, your own ambitions. The Eastern Partnership clearly is an objective of the Latvian incoming presidency. We welcome that, and this is an excellent opportunity to discuss not only with members of TEPSA, but also with members, representatives of political institutions, the media, academia, and the civil society. The ordinary citizen. We have to address the ordinary citizen. In all the member states, I would say more particularly in the elder member states, but of course also it's very important to have solid support from the ordinary citizen, the ordinary public in the new member states. So, Andris and Diana, we wholeheartedly thank you for all the work you have done to make this event possible. So on behalf of TEPSA, we thank the Latvian Institute of International Affairs for all the organizing work you have done. And we also, of course, include in our welcoming and words of gratefulness European Commission representatives and the European Parliament Information Office here in Latvia, as well as the Theseus project, represented by Frank Suder. Welcome also here in this nice Tallink hotel from the Fritz Thyssen Foundation in Cologne. You already talked very engagedly about your membership, your role, your ambitions as a member state and now the incoming president. When I prepared this very short welcoming words, I made another step backwards in history, because I think for TEPSA it's wonderful for the first time as an association to be here, a bit cold outside, but what an experience. I simply recall, in view of your history and the development of your country since your restored independence in 1991, your accession to the European Union only in 2004, the introduction of the single currency in 2014, and the fact that you are now the European cultural capital is really very impressive. So we salute all the achievements made by this country. And now your presidency, your first presidency is approaching, and we look to your presidency as a further illustration of the commitment for the sake of European unity and cooperation. Especially, you hinted at that also slightly, in this period of time, with tensions at our common borders with Russia, in Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, we look with great admiration, I can tell that on behalf of the association, to your country, and wish you all the best for the presidency, of course, but also for your country as such, and be assured of our support for all your activities. So I would like once more to congratulate the organizing team. We will be discussing now involvement, growth, and sustainability. I wish you all a very interesting and fruitful conference. And on behalf of TEPSA, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your warm words, for your enthusiasm and appreciation of what we are doing, for our cold weather as well. So that we are very happy to of course, cooperate. And congratulations, not yet, because the conference and ideas, it still should be discussed, and it's yet time. So at the end, I hope we will be able to congratulate each other. But thank you so much also for your own words and being here and providing that excellent forum as well here for Latvian participants. But with this, I continue, and as I mentioned, we have a number of partners and partnerships, and next one is Frank Suder, who represents Thyssen Foundation. Of course, this event is generously also supported by Foundation. We are happy to have you on the board as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Mrs. Skujiņa, Mrs. Čigāne, Mr. Kužnieks, Mr. Sprūds, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Fritz Thyssen Foundation, I would like to warmly welcome you to this conference beginning here today in Riga, and at the same time, I want to thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure for me to extend to you the warmest greetings of the chairman of the board of trustees of the foundation, Mr. Werner, and the chairman of the advisory scientific council, Professor Christoph Markschies. I would like to thank you, Mr. Sprūds, on behalf of everyone, for allowing us to be your guest at this conference to discuss the challenges facing the European Union from a scholarly perspective. The Fritz Thyssen Stiftung, the Fritz Thyssen Foundation in Cologne, whose sole aim and objective is to support research, has nurtured and supported analysis and scholarly work on issues and problems relating to European integration in the various scholarly fields and disciplines. In the TESOIS program, the Fritz Thyssen Foundation is carrying on this long tradition of its support interests. But what is behind TESOIS? Conceived as a Franco-German initiative, the TESOIS program, which was established around 7 years ago, is a joint project at the University of Cologne, Sciences Po, Paris, the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, TEPSA, in Brussels, and the Fritz Thyssen Foundation in Cologne, with a European network of pioneers and initiators having the objective of promoting mutual understanding of European societies. The project thus intends to make a significant contribution to better linking up national scholarly discussions and debates at the European level. TESOIS seeks to encourage an open, constructive dialogue over the future challenges facing Europe. Science, research, and scholarship thrive on dialogue, on the exchange and comparison of results, on the analysis of contrasting viewpoints and divergent arguments and interpretations. The TESOIS conferences seek to stimulate the dialogue between scholarly research and policy making in a forum in which scholars and decision makers from the field of policy and society can come together to exchange ideas. Junior researchers and young leaders from all over Europe discuss current economic, political and social challenges at the TESOIS Summer School, which takes place in Brussels every summer, and last year was devoted to the future of EU economic governance. The Foundation would like to underscore its special interest in supporting up-and-coming scholars in the field of international relations through the staging of the summer schools. TESOIS activities analyze and explore internal and external challenges facing Europe and the role of the European Union in the world. These are directed not only at political decision makers, but also scholarly study and debate within European societies, whose problems are closely connected and require complex interdisciplinary solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, in spite of all the current challenges and obstacles ahead of us, in my opinion, Our grand objective should be to work for a Europe that is economically and culturally united and stable, and that always desires and seeks viable and reliable relations with its partners. A glance at the program for the conference beginning here today in Riga bears witness to these efforts. We all want to continue to use our resources as committed trailblazers of integration to promote the notion of European society. It is in this spirit that I thank you once again for coming. I hope the conference will be a success and wish all of you interesting discussions. Paldies.
Thank you, Mr. Suder, and thank you for your support, your foundation support to the scholarship in Europe, and also for this event particularly. And we in Latvia can just add on bilateral basis that we in Latvia have very good cooperation with Ebert Stiftung and with Adenauer Stiftung. I hope also that this will be beginning of the good cooperation between us as well, and we'll be happy to have you present here in our future events as well. And with this, I'm coming back to the Latvian wing to some extent, even though Andris, of course, represents, Andris Kužnieks represents a European Commission representation here in Latvia, and we have very fruitful and very productive cooperation on many events, and this is not absolutely exception, so we are very grateful also to have you on the board, and please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Honorable Chair of Saeima European Affairs Committee, Ms. Čigāne, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. I'm also pleased to welcome you here in this conference, and I remembered that approximately 1 year ago, Andris approached us and said, you know, there's a presidency upcoming, and we need to organize an important conference. And actually, it did not take long to convince us that we have to be part of this event, and I'm happy that this conference has materialized, and of course, you have the whole day ahead of you of fruitful discussions, but already from your faces I see that you are engaged and prepared to contribute to the debate. This conference is also part of a wider partnership that we have concluded with Foreign Ministry and with European Parliament Information Office. We have signed memorandum on joint communication of the presidency during next year. And this conference is also a part of this wider memorandum, if we can call it so. On today's topics, not surprisingly, they're also on the agenda of the new Commission. Already in July, as you have noticed, President Juncker, at that time President-elect, presented his political guidelines, where he has indicated that there is a need for a new start for Europe, and his indication was that there has to be agenda for growth, jobs, fairness, and democratic change. And he has indicated his 10 priorities, which have materialized also in the new 10 priorities of the new college. I won't probably name all 10 priorities, but I would like to touch a few of them, which you will be also discussing today. The new Commission from very first day, and it has worked only 1 month, has put efforts to put forward those initiatives. The first would be investment package. We are all trying to study and understand and to engage in this process to move forward the trust of the business as well. The investment package is coupled with economic package, which was presented last week by Vice President Dombrovskis, where he has indicated that growth cannot be achieved without fiscal responsibility and structural reforms. So he is continuing the process of European semester within the European Union. And then the other important priorities where Commission will work also during the presidency are those which have been actually already mentioned, the digital single market and energy union, where based also on Commission's proposals, the presidency will move these topics to the Council as well. So the question is whether the priorities of the new Commission match Latvian presidency priorities. Of course, I think we all can conclude that very much so, and recent high-level contacts between Latvian government, Latvian parliamentarians and Commission officials, and also with the new political level, with the new college yesterday, indicated this, that the thinking is going along the same lines, actually. So I think from the Commission point of view, and that was also indicated in recent visits, that this will be productive presidency because there are no disagreements. Also, a few words on EU as a global player, where I think very rightly was mentioned that one of the priorities or few priorities of Latvian presidency will be Eastern Partnership and the summit later on next year. And also, very importantly, beyond the Eastern Partnership is working with Central Asia, which probably has not been always on the agenda for the whole EU. And I think Latvian presidency will be a great opportunity to move forward this agenda for Central Asia. And also, one of the priorities which has been also mentioned amongst these 10 priorities of the new Commission is determination of the Commission to reach a reasonable and balanced trade agreement with the United States. We all understand that it's a great challenge, and I think from Commission point of view, and that was also indicated last week in the visit of Secretary General Catherine Day to Latvian parliamentarians, also to Prime Minister, that for going forward with TTIP, there's a need to engage national parliaments, there's a need to engage national governments in debate with society on pros and cons of this agreement, and also to indicate all the potential gains that this agreement will bring to whole EU. So to end, I think we are all determined to move Union forward, and I think the key word for this would be together. So I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kužnieks, for the additional insights to the sort of introductory remarks and introductory ideas, and also underlining the role of European Commission. And we have some expectations from the new European Commission. Let's hope that some of the expectations also will be fulfilled and met, and that we will have a dynamic couple of next years, and not only a couple of next years. But with this, I'm happy to give the floor to our good colleague Michal Koran from our good partner institution, the Czech Institution of International Relations, to provide some recommendations to us on how the good presidency must be implemented and what kind of priorities we should focus on. And you have your own experience as leading quite successful Czech presidency some years ago. Michal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and first of all, congratulations on this great event, Andris. It's a great honor to be here, and thanks to the TEPSA board for granting the opportunity to present the recommendations to the Institute of International Relations, which I'm happy to represent here. The TEPSA has a tradition to work out recommendations to the incoming presidency. This time the team was under a firm but kind leadership of Professor Jan Beck, and the team included also Professor Gianni Bonvicini and Dr. Gunilla Herolf. It is important to say that however smart these recommendations are, they do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the TEPSA or of the individual TEPSA members. The recommendations are meant to be brief, concrete, and realistic. And from what I heard in the first speech, I think that they fall well
within the line of the TEPSA, of the Latvian presidency priorities, they might go a bit further in some respects. As of the Justice and Home Affairs Council, the EU member states regularly deplore the human tragedies visible every day among people seeking asylum. Yet, despite a long-standing commitment to establish a common asylum system, it remains unfinished business. From both a moral and practical perspective, we urge the Latvian government to do its utmost to achieve agreement on these contentious issues. Economic and financial affairs. The Europe 2020 strategy should adopt a new strategic guideline calling on member states to undertake far-reaching reforms of public administrations, complementing initiatives to achieve better regulation and more disciplined public finances. The high-profile 300+ billion investment package announced by the Commission has the potential to be part of a solution to economic stagnation in many member states, but immediate actions are also needed to give a rapid stimulus to construction while simultaneously improving energy efficiency. A program to boost renovation of housing to reduce energy loss should be launched during the Latvian presidency with co-funding from the EU budget. As of the Foreign Affairs Council, geopolitical developments are manifestly calling into question many of the core assumptions of EU foreign and security policy and have exposed the shortcomings of the European neighborhood policy. And ambitions to have strategic partnerships with third countries, starting with Russia, have not been realized. In addition, the concept of a comprehensive security approach in the field of external security has proved to be unworkable in the absence of sufficiently credible military component. It should also be emphasized that the scope of European foreign and security policy is not just purely regional. On the contrary, the EU has to engage with other parts of the world, not just as a trade partner or a trade power, but as a constructive and effective security actor. To reflect these new hard realities, we advocate a European global strategy instead of one primarily focused on the neighborhood. This is where I think that the recommendation goes a bit further than the original Latvian presidencies. Therefore, we call on the Latvian presidency to support the newly appointed High Representative in drafting a new European global strategy and to set a target for the planned June European Council meeting to agree a new and formal European global strategy. Furthermore, threats affecting cyberspace have been identified by the European Council as a growing concern, and cybersecurity must unavoidably be strengthened if the digital agenda component of Europe 2020 is to succeed. In view of its extensive experience in the field of digitalization and cybersecurity, the Latvian presidency is encouraged to bring forward specific proposals for improving cybersecurity at the EU level. One very actual note, or a recent note on Moldova. To avoid sending the wrong signals to Russia, the EU should make clear that it welcomes the outcome of parliamentary elections in Moldova as fair and democratic, and should regard outside attempts to destabilize development after the elections as acts of aggression. The EU presidency should be ready to assist the new government to carry out all necessary reforms. Last but not least, the General Affairs Council. The increasing prominence of the European Council in the EU's decision-making, particularly in specific economic policies, risks creating divisions between poor and rich, northern and southern, big and small countries, and also undermines the Commission's agenda setting and leadership roles. In the interests of rebalancing the institutional mix and taking into account that the issue has been highlighted by the presidents of the Commission and the European Parliament, we propose the development of a series of interinstitutional agreements among the main organs of the EU, including the European Central Bank, the court, and so on, with the purpose of rendering the whole system more legitimate and accountable. I believe that the team delivered on its promise to be brief, and it's up to you now to judge if it's realistic and ambitious enough. But despite whatever we said or whatever proposed, I wish the Latvian presidency to be a very successful one, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you to Mihail. And yes, I'm a little bit, in a sense, puzzled because we have already quite ambitious priorities: Eastern Partnership, Central Asia, competitive Europe, digital single market. And I could see that we should add some priorities to list of these already, sort of the asylum issues, the TTIP, which already was mentioned, the new strategy for the external policies, institutional, some perhaps reform as well. So it seems that there is a lot to do. And of course, we are very ambitious and enthusiastic. Well, I'm a little bit more cautious on the capacity and opportunity to implement all of this, but of course, we'll be looking forward, trying to do some of the things and to move forward at least some of the aspects, if not immediately to solve everything. But with this, I am happy to finish the first official formal part of our conference, and let's start engage in a debate. And for this, I invite my colleagues to the first panel, especially Kārlis Bukovskis, who is a chairman, on the first panel, Citizens' Concerns in a Stronger EU, the Sustainability of Institutional Economic Developments. Kārlis, please, you are taking over the chairmanship, and please also have the distinguished panelists to the table.
Okay, good morning, colleagues, friends. It's my honor to chair this panel. I think that in this case we're moving away a little bit from the political statements to more practical issues, and we'll be discussing the presidency priorities maybe a little bit more in detail. But the very idea was, of course, to discuss more what are the challenges, have we missed something while drafting the presidency priorities, is there anything else to be addressed, and how it should be addressed. So in this case, I'm very honored to chair this panel with such a splendid speakers on like Lolita, Čigāne, Loukas, Tsoukalis, Adriaan, Schout, Ramunas, Vilpišauskas, and Visnja, Samardzija. People come from very different countries, but while reading through their biographies, I found out that basically most of them have similar and very similar academic experiences, have experiences in writing articles and books and doing research on the European Union affairs, on economic issues. But I'm going to address each of the panelists in detail when their turn comes. From my own perspective, I'm very much happy to participate and chair this panel, for not only for the reason being a researcher and following the European Union affairs and global political economy issues, but also because of the fact that I have been involved for a couple of years already in drafting and coordinating the presidency priorities and the Latvian both trio program and 6-month program. So in this case, I'm actually very much looking forward seeing what do you have to say on what are the challenges.
we try to expect the unexpected. We try to look into a crystal ball and see whether we can come up with the presidency priorities and the issues that will be important to the European Union in this first semester of 2015. We are hoping that we have managed to, because to a large extent, of course, the European Commission plans as well as the Eurocouncil plans are very much reflected also in our priorities, or our priorities reflect the priorities of other institutions. So the question is, there are multiple questions, of course, on the table, but the growth is a challenge in the European Union. The digitalization is necessary. The engagement of the European Union in the world is absolutely necessary. When we think about this competitiveness priority that Inga was already presenting before, then of course, how to achieve it, how to promote investments and entrepreneurial drive in the European Union. These are the things that we are very much in need at the moment. Digital Europe, seizing digital opportunities, growth, digital single market, and digital by default. What are those issues that it should be discussed? Can we be looking at ourselves as digital by default? Should we be looking? Should we promote e-governance and e-skills? Should we be dealing more only with the cybersecurity issues? How to use these highways that we have built and where to get the cars to be driving them. We have the infrastructure, but we do not necessarily have always the application of that infrastructure that we have built. And engaged Europe. The question is not only about the Eastern Partnership issues and only about the Russian and Ukrainian situation. The question is also how to engage the US, what to do with the migration and asylum issues, which were mentioned already previously by TEPSA recommendations, and how to assist the High Representative, how to be on the same page with the High Representative on so many issues that the European Union is currently engaged into. Just to be very quick and technical now, each of the panelists, I'll each give you about 7 minutes, if it's fine with you. I'm going to be very sharp because we are on time. We're starting even 5 minutes earlier than expected. So in this case, we're hoping to end at 20 to 12 as planned. So in this case, the idea is that each of you give your presentations, and then maybe I will, maybe I will not abuse my capacity as a moderator and ask a question. But generally, the idea is to give the floor to the audience after your presentations are over. In this case, I should start with Lolita, but we have a letter that I have to read. We have agreed that there is not only 5 panelists, there are actually 6 panelists, because apparently Valdis Dombrovskis, the Vice President of the European Commission, has joined us not in person, but in his short statement to all of us. So I'm going to take the liberty and reading that to you. Well, I'm not going to try to impersonate, of course, the Vice President, but in this case, it goes like this. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to address you today at the Latvian European Union Pre-Presidency Conference, Moving the Union Forward, Involvement, Growth, Sustainability. As the Vice President for Euro and Social Dialogue, I will outline some of the key economic challenges that lie ahead Europe in the coming month. Latvian presidency will have to steer the EU at a time when European economic recovery is still fragile. The European Commission is taking decisive decisions to pave the way to return to growth. It is a slow process, as economic activity remains sluggish and unemployment is still persistently high. It stands at 11.5% for the euro area. Too many Europeans are still facing the social consequences of the crisis. Latvia's presidency focus on the European competitiveness by revising EU 2020 strategy and building single digital market goes hand in hand with the Commission's political priorities and the President Juncker's 315 billion euro investment plan for Europe. It shows we are playing our part in attracting more and better investment right across Europe. Yet this must be pursued by essential structural reforms coupled with fiscal responsibility. High levels of debt remain a drag on growth in many Euro member states. We encourage member states to prioritize growth in enhancing expenditure, including investment, and to shift tax burden away from labor. Latvia can lead by example. Following one of the deepest economic and social crises, it joined the euro area and has become one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. We should work together to make sure that the investment package joined by structural reforms and fiscal credibility translates into tangible and lasting results that improve people's lives. All three elements are necessary to get confidence, jobs, and growth back to Europe. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you great success in your work today. Valdis Dombrovskis. So in this case, after this, I'm actually very, very pleased to give floor again to Lolita Čigāne, who's the chairperson of the European Affairs Committee in the Latvian Parliament. She has quite a vast experience. Well, some of the things which should be mentioned, I try to actually all of the participants are, as I told you already, splendid in their careers, and I had to somehow put their biographies in a nutshell. So I'm very sorry if I missed something very important, and you can of course name it afterwards. So the education, of course, Central European University and London School of Economics are mentioned among the most important ones. There's also mentioned the Westeros University, which I'm thinking, isn't that from Game of Thrones? She has worked at the Soros Foundation on electoral campaign evaluation, has been a member of the 10th, 11th, and 12th Parliament of Latvia, and has also performed the functions of the Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Finance. Lolita, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. There is one thing you didn't mention. I'm a mother of two future Europeans, 11-year-old boys, and we already have debates about the future of Europe at home sometimes, and I'm surprised to what extent nowadays children are advanced and deep thinking, analyzing, observing. It's really quite incredible. And it's a big question of how we will be able to respond to this new generation and what we will leave to them as a cluster institution of ideas, growth, opportunities. So this, yes, this gives a perspective, a future perspective of our work today. But generally speaking, in trying to answer the question about citizens' concern in a stronger EU, I was trying to think about it globally in terms of competing ideas. Of course, we have this end of history concept where we said that after the collapse of communism, it was clear that the liberal democracy has won. That's the model everyone should develop that way, and that's it, basically. And obviously, nowadays we see that this whole concept is really being contested. There are other models that some people believe in, and basically we are in competition of ideas, of concepts of how countries see the world, how they develop, and what is basically the key of successful society. And this brings me to the question, how can we convince the European citizens that this is the right project, that we want to support it, that we want to work for it? Of course, the European integration will be always elite-driven. That's natural, because obviously if you deal with it, with the issues of European integration, with the issues of single market, with the issues of the four movements, on day-to-day basis, you see the perspective and you see the obstacles. When you don't deal with it on day-to-day basis, but work in a completely different sphere, it's quite hard to see this global perspective. And that is natural, and we have to respect and shouldn't be angry with our citizens for sometimes not understanding what we are trying to promote to them, sometimes getting frustrated with our big ideas, and they just don't get it. And we shouldn't get frustrated. It's natural because we all have different perspectives, and it's just a matter of fostering good dialogue. And this question of how to foster the good dialogue, I think specifically in the last half a year has become increasingly important, both here regionally in Latvia, in the Baltics, but also in the European Union. Because we actually see that our information space is being permeated by propaganda of the ideas that are extremely unfriendly to the ideas that the European Union is based on. And now I'm talking about the propaganda and information that we receive from Russia. And it's not only confined to the citizens in Latvia that understands Russian. So many of them speak Russian and that use the Russian language media. There's one particular model of twisting the truth, of having some truth, but also a lot of manipulation in reflecting the events, for instance, in Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, Russia itself, and also the wider world. This approach is very skillfully used. And many people, it wins hearts and minds of people. But also, the Western societies are being very much influenced by the same approach. For instance, many people watch Russia Today and believe that it's an integral, good news channel because by form it looks just like CNN or BBC. It has good anchors with beautiful English accents. It projects the news in a way where it's credible. And very often, even my colleagues in our parliament, but also in other parliaments from the European Union countries, come back to me with the arguments that seem just having come through from Russia Today directly. So this is a very big question of how we compete for the ideas. And it's obvious that Russia, being a dictatorial and authoritative state, can invest a lot of resources in a few particular fields. We know that the military spending has really increased, and also the investments in information space and information strategy has really invested. And here, for instance, in Latvia, we compete with many different interests because we are, of course, a democratic society. Our teachers' salaries for police officers, infrastructure, many other priorities. We will never have the ability of this concentrated investment in several particular areas. And for that, sometimes we have a feeling that we are just losing out. And not losing out only here, but losing out in several debates also in the broader European space, where people come up with arguments that we need to keep all the lines open with Putin, we still have to negotiate, we should not make him angry over our overly enthusiastic activities towards Ukraine or Moldova for that reason, an argumentation like that. And sometimes we do feel that somehow we lose the argument. And it goes also for our citizens, that some of our citizens sometimes come out with ideas that it's good to have a strong leader, it's good to have well-defined priorities. Oh, I have only 1 minute. So how can we win hearts and minds of citizens? My answer is by practice, by making their lives better, by making them feel that things are improving, and therefore I think this agenda of growth, competitiveness, and economic success is very important. As was mentioned here, Latvia's GDP has grown by staggering 20% over the time we've been members of the EU. And that's the best argument we've had towards our citizens. Of course, now we have to work towards sustainability and equality of this growth, equal spread of this growth, and these are the big questions that we will have to deal with in future. The big numbers of youth unemployment in the southern neighbors of the European Union is unacceptable. That's where the populism and the beliefs in this propaganda takes root. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lolita, very much. You're very exact on time. I'm going to use the opportunity and still ask you the question. You said that what people need nowadays, what the European Union need nowadays is and how good the economic priorities fit into the current state of play. I'm also wondering whether the lack of ambition and lack of inspiration from the side of the European Union is also not one of the things which is maybe sometimes providing an upper hand to the European Union adversaries, so to speak.
Well, definitely, and I think this one lack of ambition is very well characterized by this concept of, for instance, enlargement fatigue, which is an appropriate concept. Of course, you get tired of enlargement, which is very cumbersome. On the other hand, just admitting that there is an enlargement fatigue in the European Union, it gives a sense that there is a lack of ambition. Because obviously it's not an attempt to divide the spheres of influence, as sometimes is again promoted or portrayed by this propaganda. It's an ambition to have a peaceful and stable environment. And I think that ambition is very important. It's very important to preserve it, specifically because a lot of countries around the present-day European Union are very much looking for that inspiration. They need it.
Thank you, Lolita. Now I'm turning my head towards Loukas Tsoukalis. Well, you have such a exhaustive CV, and in this case, I will mention only a few of the things. Of course, education: University of Manchester, College of Europe in Bruges, and University of Oxford. The academic experience includes being professor at the London School of Economics. By the way, did you both meet there? No.
I would have remembered it.
Also, research and professorship at the European University Institute, Sciences Po in Paris, University of Athens, where he currently is also. He's been author on quite many books. One of the most recent ones is The New European Economy and What Kind of Europe. I give the floor to you if there is something which I have forgotten to mention, but you have still 7 minutes only.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great pleasure to be in Riga, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to share some thoughts on the state of the Union and the challenges facing the incoming presidency of Latvia. Let me start with a rather simple and banal observation, and this is that Europe has been in crisis for several years. Now, some people say that we've seen crises before, we've experienced many crises, and we usually come out stronger. I beg to differ, because this crisis is very different from the others. It is no doubt the worst crisis we have experienced since the beginning of European integration in the 1950s, and it looks increasingly like an existential crisis for the European Union, testing the old model of joint management of interdependence and shared sovereignty in times of prolonged economic stagnation, growing economic divergence between countries and within countries because of growing inequalities within our societies, rising nationalism, and also the strengthening of anti-establishment parties, and very often Eurosceptic parties, in the sense that in our societies, what we are experiencing is that the center is being squeezed in political terms, and the extremes are growing bigger, of course, in some countries more than in others. Now, the crisis is economic in its core, but not only, and it is centered in the Eurozone, but not exclusively. So it is an economic crisis centered on the Eurozone, but it also goes beyond, and it goes much deeper. If I may remind you that in economic terms, we already have a lost decade behind us. If we take the Eurozone, real GDP of 2007 will not be recovered before the end of 2015 at the earliest. In some parts of Europe, we have not only high unemployment, but youth unemployment that has reached the stratosphere, which suggests that unless something dramatic happens, on top of a lost decade, we are likely to have lost generations as well. Now, how to deal with the crisis? Europe has been divided since the outbreak of the crisis in 2008. There is a deep political and ideological divide as to how to manage the crisis, and I will try to simplify a bit because I'm only given 7 minutes. On one side of the ideological divide, people represented mostly in creditor countries and also representing mostly the right wing of the political spectrum. And these are the ones who have been calling the shots in Europe until today, are those who have been stressing the need for structural reform and fiscal consolidation. The argument being that with structural reform and fiscal consolidation, we will make Europe fit again for economic growth and recovery. The trouble is that after a lost economic decade, Europe today is faced with a risk of deflation. Economic recovery remains very fragile and extremely uneven. Public debt is much higher than it was in 2008. Private debt remains very high, and the banks are still trying to deleverage. So the prospects are not terribly good. On the other end of the ideological and political divide, again simplifying, people are represented mostly in debtor countries, but also more on the left of center of the political spectrum. These are the people who argue that Europe also needs a much more active use of fiscal and monetary policy in order to boost demand. The argument being that aggregate demand in the European economy is very low as a result of the bursting of the biggest financial bubble since 1929, may I remind you, and which has led to a rapid process of deleveraging in the private sector. Now, if economic recovery does not appear soon, I fear that the political and social consequences in Europe will become increasingly unmanageable. Of course, in some countries more than in others. And the rise of anti-establishment parties in many European countries is an indication of that. And I finished, don't worry. So I think the challenge that is facing us in Europe today is how to reconcile the two sides of this political and ideological divide. How to combine wide-ranging measures of structural reform in individual countries with a more active use of fiscal and monetary policy. This is precisely that bargain that Europe needs to strike in the near future, today rather than tomorrow, if we are to create the conditions for economic recovery. If the Latvian presidency can help in striking such a bargain, it will have done a great service to everybody, although, to be realistic, this is also a game where the big guys usually call the shots. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tsoukalis. Just one very quick question. You were talking about the crisis and the state of crisis in which the European Union is in, and I was just wondering, thinking about back at the European Union for already decades, we have been permanently contemplating about what state of situation is the European Union in? Is it in crisis or not? So in this case, I'm actually wondering if you could answer the question, maybe give a short perspective. How should the European Union look like in order for it not to be seen as being in crisis?
If a union that has become poorer in the course of 10 years, with high unemployment, with unprecedented divisions between the North and the South, with the dramatic rise of Eurosceptic parties in most of our countries, is not crisis, I don't know what the hell is. So I have no doubt that this is a crisis. Of course, we have experienced crisis in the past. We experienced crisis in the 1970s. We experienced crisis with the empty chair of the French even earlier, many of them. This, I believe, and I very much hope I'm wrong, but I suspect I'm not, this is a much deeper and a much more existential crisis than anything else we have experienced before. And this, of course, is linked to a deep economic problem in the whole of Europe, but it also goes much further, because you have to bear in mind that there's a growing disconnect between economics and politics in our societies. There is a growing alienation of citizens from political elites, and this you do not witness in one country or two. You witness it in most European countries. So these are signs of deep-seated problems. I'm not suggesting that Europe is not able to face them, but I think the first step in dealing with those problems is recognizing those problems in public and not pretend that things are going well, because they're not going well.
Thank you very much. I now turn my head to Adriaan Schout, with education from Groningen and Leiden University, working at the Netherlands Institute of International Affairs, or Clingendael, and has also been author of very many books, and has also been an expert for the European Commission, for DG Research, and the latest book that at least was mentioned and was turned my attention was the Coordination of the European Union, Exploring the Capacities of Network Governance. So you have 7 minutes, please.
I should update my CV. The latest one is on the Netherlands, whether it's still an awkward partner. Thank you for inviting me. In the 7 minutes, I think I also want to talk about the narrative, because that's what apparently we're all talking about. We're talking about citizens' concern, and Tsoukalis just spoke about the narrative of the grand bargain between austerity and offering growth prospects, I guess. When we're talking about presidencies, we are talking about a lot of policies, and many policies have already been mentioned. Asylum policy, economic policies, etc. But policies are not enough to satisfy the public. Yes, the public wants to see activities, but the public also wants to see, where is the EU going? What is the grand narrative that we are having? And at least in the Netherlands, we can see that the public is very supportive of European policies, but it has doubts about the EU as a whole. So the question of how to involve the public, how to make sure the public supports the EU, is a question of telling the public, where is the EU going? Where is all of this leading? And that's, at least in the Netherlands, where there are doubts. Much support for policies, but where does it all lead? That's the big question in the Netherlands. So that's the question of the narrative. And unfortunately, politicians haven't been very good at the narrative, telling where the EU is actually developing. Roger Liddell, the advisor on EU affairs of Tony Blair, has just written a book on his experience of 10 years in the British government. And he is very clear at some points that, well, we're not telling the public exactly where all of this is leading. We can see that also in the Dutch political debate, where by the time of the crisis in 2012, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister were telling in newspapers and in the Parliament that, well, we need consolidation in the EU. Well, as a matter of fact, the EU is working on, all the measures that have been taken. So. But the question of where is this heading towards was left alone. I'm not quite sure whether I would be so positive about the current Juncker's story about big on big things and small on small things, because when I look at what he's actually presenting, I'm not quite sure whether he actually has much of a direction to present us. So the narrative. one of the narratives, there are many narratives at the moment going around, but one of the narratives I could, since I only have a few minutes, distill from the current debates is the one on the Commission becoming a government. Like it or not, it's one of the narratives. In the Commission, if you're now walking through the corridors, there's in big letters on the walls in all languages, official EU languages, we are the executive. We now have a Spitzenkandidat. In Der Spiegel, the Commission is presented as, new Commission Juncker is presented as the new government of the EU. Also, if you look at the language with regards to European unions, 5 years ago, if I'm correct, Busek and Delors presented the energy community. Now we talk about an energy union. We have a capital union. We have a fiscal union, at least discussions about it. So the language of unions comes, the language of governmentalization, the language of centralization, the language of the European Parliament becoming more important. So one of the components of the narratives that are currently going around is of governmentalization. And I think if we look at the excellent blueprint of Barroso on the genuine economic and monetary union from 2 years ago, it also spoke indirectly of fiscal union and of the Commission with even a Minister of Economic Affairs. So that's part of the narrative that we have. Now, what kind of alternative narrative could we present to the public that the public might be put more at rest? And the thing I have in mind is actually to put in all the steps the question of what does it mean for the member states? And I'm here talking about the method and the presentation of the EU. And I've been looking at some of the documents that the Dutch government has been sending to the parliament over the past few weeks. One was on the rule of law. There's a rule of law program, as you all know. If you read the rule of law program of the Commission, it says the Commission will monitor the member states. The Commission will evaluate. The Commission will give advice. If we look at what Olli Rehn has been doing, let's not talk about Dombrovskis at the moment, but going back, DG ECFIN has been growing very much in size. DG ECFIN is giving, is distilling advice to the member states on what the member states should be doing. We had the situation in the Netherlands that Olli Rehn came to the Dutch parliament defending his analysis of the situation in the Netherlands and giving his advice to the Netherlands. We have the Commission evaluation of the 2-pack and the 6-pack. We have the Commission presenting the annual growth survey. These are just things that I take from the documents that have recently gone to the National Parliament. We have the banking union. Interestingly, we are doing interviews. How will the banking union look in 5 years? Quite a few people actually tell us that there will be a centralization of control. Yes, we do talk about the role of national central banks in it, but probably the ECB will take over more and more. So in all these elements, we see EU institutions, particularly the Commission and in terms of banking union, the European Central Bank, becoming more important. I thought we had an EU where the first line of control was with the member states and the second line of control was with the Commission. Now it seems that we are getting into a union where the first line of control becomes the Commission. And I think many of the things that are going on from the list I just listed is the question, should we not go back to asking the member states what they do? It's strange that DG ECFIN tells us how our economy should look like in the Netherlands, whereas we have a national institute which does the same thing. The question is, the Commission should probably monitor the quality of our national institutions instead of telling what to do. So it is pushing responsibilities back to the member states, getting member states more involved so that it is not the language of the Commission will, the Commission will, the Commission will, but that the Commission and the member states will work together towards monitoring, deciding best policies in order to create a culture of ownership, professional standards, and all the rest of it. I think that is possible. I think that is necessary because an EU which uses the language of centralization is in deep trouble because it's probably from an administrative perspective and a public support perspective very difficult to work. Thank you very much. I hope I'm still under 7 minutes.
Yeah, no, you're not, but it's fine. Thank you, Adriaan, very much. Just a very quick question, because you were speaking on the narrative of this centralization, on the language of the unions, and the very fact that this very idea of concentrating power more and more within the European Union institutions is creating quite some tensions. My question would be. Okay, thank you. So my question would be whether there isn't the second narrative, which is promoted by the UK and also by Dutch government occasionally, on the very fact of repatriation of some competences, on re-evaluation of the European Union's capacities and instruments that it has been given. So in this case, what do you think? Isn't there still the question about two discourses trying to win over each other, to achieve hegemony?
Well, I have to be careful because I did the subsidiarity exercise for Timmermans. But let's be frank, the subsidiarity exercises will not lead very much. The more fundamental, it's not about policies, as I just said. It is about what kind of Europe are we creating? Is this a Europe that reinforces member states, that drags member states back into Europe in decision making, in monitoring themselves, but also in mutual monitoring the position of all of other member states. It's strengthening national institutions working together with each other, with the Commission. That is much more important than a discussion on subsidiarity. And I think the outcome of the Dutch subsidiarity debate and Cameron's exercise proved that is even from a narrative perspective, a very bleak narrative, the subsidiarity story.
Thank you. Now I'm turning my head back towards the left side. Ramunas Vilpišauskas, the director of the Institute of International Relations and Political Science at the University of Vilnius. Experience and education at the Vilnius University and Lancaster University, also have been teaching and working at the Syracuse University, and has been a Fulbright scholar in Columbia University, has been doing research at the European University Institute, has been also a chief political or policy advisor to the president of Lithuania in period until crisis. And has written a vast number of articles and research, and including one fairly recent one on the Lithuanian presidency achievements. Ramunas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and also thanks to organizers for giving this opportunity. I would also start from the context. Like Loukas, Tsoukalis, I think we can define it as an economic stagnation, political uncertainty, and security crisis, or basically war going on in the neighborhood of the European Union. And why is this also important? In addition to what was already said, I think it exposes and contributes to the trend of differentiation in the European Union. Differentiation among political movements in different member states, differentiation of ideas how to solve the issue of economic stagnation, differentiation which also is reflected in national positions of different member states. If we talk about our security environment, again, we have different perceptions of threat in different member states, and it is very obvious when we follow the debates on economic sanctions. Actually, I think it is remarkable how much the EU managed to agree, and what has been adopted until July, September shows quite a big consensus. But on the other hand, when we follow the debates now, how EU should further react into what's happening in Eastern neighborhood with regards to Russian aggression, I think we can say that positions differ and threat perceptions are quite different depending on history, depending on the economic interdependence of different member states, also ruling parties in different member states. And to add to these examples of differentiation, there are also divergent trends of political integration or disintegration. We just heard from Adriaan about a bit about the debate in Netherlands. We all know the ongoing debate in the UK. Scotland had the referendum. We see debate in Spain, Catalonia. On the other hand, next month, one member state, which I know quite well, will join the Eurozone. So we also see the trend of integration at the same time, and this will, I think, contribute to all three Baltic states becoming more integrated into the Eurozone. And also Baltic Sea region, we also see interesting advancements in integration of energy infrastructure. I think this will be debated in the afternoon, but just to connect this to Latvian domestic scene, I think LNG terminal in Lithuania, which is now just these days starting to work, will create huge pressure for aligning regulatory environment in all three Baltic states, pressure to export natural gas from the LNG terminal into Latvia, I think will cause a lot of debates about adoption of third energy package here in Latvia, the timetable and the method of doing that. So there are interesting developments happening which point towards further integration. So all these examples of differentiation, they are important for the presidency, for Latvian EU Council presidency, because that means the role of mediator, the role of broker, will be more challenging. And I think this is one of the conclusions that I would make from observing what's happening in the EU, even under the Lisbon Treaty, which, as we know, reduced the importance of the rotating council presidency. It has important roles, and differentiation, which is going on in the EU, will complicate further the fulfillment of the key role of the presidency. Plus, what Lithuanian presidency experience shows, Latvian institutions should be ready to spend a lot of time dealing with European Parliament. In this respect, this nice metaphor of Andris that all roads lead to Riga, and I'm sure we are all happy to be here in Riga, is more of a metaphor than a reflection of the presidency work, because most of the work will take place in Brussels, and not only and probably not so much in the Council, mediating between member states, but between the Council and the European Parliament, or in trilogues. And this is something which I think just recent presidencies have learned. Of course, there is a difference between Latvian and Lithuanian presidency in terms of the political cycle of the European Parliament, which just started working now. For Lithuania, it was obviously an additional interest of members of European Parliament to be visible, to conclude as many dossiers as possible before the end of the term of the European Parliament. I think Greek presidency probably also experienced this similar political pressure. But I think that's one of the points which we can draw from Lithuanian experience. And another point I would like to make is that even under the Lisbon Treaty architecture of external relations, I mean European External Action Service, High Representative, there are still a lot of possibilities for the rotating presidency to have its input into external relations, and in particular Eastern Partnership issues. Again, I think if Latvian institutions are willing and capable to take a lead towards the Riga summit and to actively work on Eastern Partnership issues, it's possible. Lisbon Treaty does not prevent this. I think that's one of the experiences of Lithuania. And to conclude, I see similar enthusiasm here in Latvia, especially in the parliament. But I think our experience shows that enthusiasm should also be matched with political mobilization and consensus among all key political and institutional actors, and again by realistic understanding of what presidency involves and how much of it is going on in Brussels when your national parliament does not really have a role or time to contribute. So I think this will be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramunas. You started your speech with some kind of, which I don't know if we can call this an integration fatigue. We're usually speaking about enlargement fatigue, but in this case, I think your description, as did also Loukas and Adriaan say, this very much resembles something like the integration fatigue. So, but it has been around, so to speak, for a while already, and if you are in this case so kind and giving suggestions to the Latvian presidency, I have a question. How did the Lithuanian presidency channel this EU integration enthusiasm?
I think it was mostly reflected in the work of our permanent representation in Brussels. And Lithuanian institutions adopted so-called Brussels-based model of coordination, which I think one of the key factors that contributed to rather effective work, fast decision-making. There was some learning process. I think our political elites have went through a learning process that it's not your national priorities, but European agenda that counts during the presidency. We can see this even in the formulation of priorities of Lithuanian presidency, from 4 national priorities to 3 broad European priorities. And I think also the leadership of Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė was quite important, especially in terms of being a face of the presidency, despite the fact that, according to the Lisbon Treaty, the head of state does not have a role anymore in the rotating presidencies. It was Mr. Van Rompuy that was doing this job. But yeah, that's briefly my response to that.
Thank you, Ramunas. And now, last but for sure not the least, Visnja Samardzija, I hope I pronounced it correctly, at least close, from Croatia. You're the youngest member state, so in this case we are very interested in hearing what you have to say and what your take is on the challenges that the European Union is now facing. Visnja has been graduating the University of Zagreb, has been also working related to the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, Central European University. Ramunas, didn't you didn't meet, right?
No.
Okay, just checking. And of course, now working for the Institute of Development and International Relations, and has also written a great number of articles and research on the European integration. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is my really great pleasure to take part in this panel and to share with you some of my views. And the topic is interesting and very, very relevant today. And I would like to focus on one challenge, which has already been mentioned, and this is socio-economic issues and youth unemployment. This is actually among the top priorities of the new Commission, of the Parliament, also of the current trio presidency. But I would add that it is in the focus of interest and of concerns of citizens of Europe. So if we look at the Eurobarometer report, last report shows that actually the economic situation and the unemployment are two highest concerns of citizens in the EU, and actually some 40% of citizens are deeply concerned about economic situation, and it is followed by the unemployment. The perceptions are slightly being improved, but still there are a lot of Eurosceptics views, which was mentioned before. So there is one paradox, however, if we follow the citizens' perceptions, and this is that the trust in the EU institutions is not very high, but trust in national institutions is usually in most of the countries even much lower. So this is something really for the concern. There is a growing social division, which has already been mentioned. The countries of the EU vary considerably in their ability to create inclusive societies. There are big social disparities and social imbalances, it was already mentioned, between the North and South, and also between young and old citizens. And actually, the solutions for these problems cannot be found at national level, so the EU action is really needed. So this is confirmed also by the new EU Social Justice Index, which draws, which basically really shows these clear divisions between North and South, and practically all southern and southeastern countries. Eastern countries are actually lagging behind. The others, particularly Greece, which has nearly 60% of youth unemployment, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia is also among those countries, Spain, Portugal, and the others. And I think youth unemployment is something which is actually the EU's number one concern today, because in 2014, the total number of unemployed people in the EU reached almost 25 million. Out of this, 5 million are young people. So this is really worrying, and there are different measures such as Youth Guarantee Scheme, Youth Employment Initiative, but actually the success of these measures depends on effective implementation in the member states. Therefore, I would just like to mention the Eurofund study, which shows how much is it important and relevant for European citizens. This is the study from 2011, which estimated that the cost of young people which are not in employment, not in education, and not in training in 2001 was amounted equivalent to 1.2% of the overall GDP of the EU, or the annual loss of it is some 150 billion euro. So this is really a big money. In this context, this new investment plan of the Juncker's Commission is really welcome, and I think, although there are different views now, this is completely new, adopted last week, but actually this is important because it will stimulate investment for the purpose of growth creation and jobs. And particularly in this context, I think it is very important to mention that it has been announced and intended to create over 1 million jobs in next 3 years. I think it is very, very important and it is crucial to include the dimension of youth employment into the job-creating projects through the infrastructure projects, which will hopefully be possible. So it is crucial now really to improve the investment climate, because the investors are those who have to invest in their projects in the EU, and it is crucial now also to make Europe more attractive for investment. In this context, the competitiveness is really a big issue. The EU is, which has already been mentioned, is not enough competitive, is not well competing with the other parts of the world, and the EU is also very much divided regarding competitiveness. The competitiveness level is much higher in some of the countries. We have 5 EU member states which are ranked among 10 most competitive countries on the world scale. However, the remaining EU countries are much lagging behind. They found themselves in the second or third part of the World Economic Report table. So what is important is really to focus on the pillars of competitiveness, on infrastructure, on labor policy, education and training, R&D, on innovations and on business environment in particular. And what is very important, what I would like to underline at the end, that there is also strong divide between the EU member countries, between those which are efficient in reforms and those which are not implementing well reforms. And I would like to underline that Greece and Portugal, for example, made big shift on the world competitiveness scale due to the reforms that they have undertaken. This is very important. And of course, the Europe 2020 strategy will have to focus on these issues, because just to add that the goal to reach 70% of the employment rate was not reached, but it even decreased. So the employment rate decreased in the period of the implementation, and I think it will be another very, very big task for the countries and for the EU as well. Thank you. I hope I was in time.
You are, yes.
So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation on the current economic struggles and problems that the European Union is facing. I have a question, maybe a little bit technical one, but it's still on one of the priorities and one of the ideas of the new European Commission is that to advance the digital single market, to invest in digital issues, the same which the Latvian presidency is also following. So one of the arguments is that there are jobs to be created in advancing the digital issues. So the question is, do you see that as a viable plan? Do you actually see that there is a potential really in digital sphere to create jobs?
Well, I think there must be potential for creating jobs, and I don't think we should only, this is one of the priorities, and I think this is good that the Juncker's Commission is trying to do to make strong partnership with the EU member states, so to do it together. And I think there must be a space here, but I don't think we should focus we should think on one area. This is high priority, but I think job creation must be the goal for all 10 within all 10 priorities. I'm coming from the newest EU member state, which is facing deep problems in this regard, and what is the citizens' perception of this? This is now crucial also for us, because expectations have been much higher, and jobs and better social position is something that is crucial for the citizens. So we are facing the problem that the citizens' expectations have been much higher than what we have achieved. You know that we are now also facing prolonged recession and deep economic problems, and it is very, very important to show to the citizens that these European values are really for themselves and that they are those which are profiting from this, and jobs for young generations and jobs for the European citizens are really crucial.
Thank you, thank you. We have been promising a lot. That's what you're absolutely correct. With this, I actually would like to open the floor to the audience, to the questions. So in this case, if you could raise your hand so the microphone can approach you, and then please state your name, affiliation, and then your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Czech ambassador, and I would like to thank all the panelists for very thoughtful and well-prepared statements. My question will go to Professor Tsoukalis. I agree very much with economic analysis you gave to the crisis. Also, I have a little bit support what Ms. Samardzija said about simple north, rich north, and the poor south division. I think it's valid in UN, but not in Europe, because Europe is more colorful. In 28, we have west, north, east, south, and I think that some newcomers to the club, GDP, and the average salary is still much lower than in the south. So, but the question which I would like to pose to you, whether you think that the simple economic recovery in today's geopolitical world, in order to preserve what Mr. Suder said from Fritz Thyssen Stiftung, it's mean European cultural unity and identity and democratic value. It's enough in order to solve the problem of division between political elite. Mr. Čigāne said about the role of political elite, the gap which exists between political elite and the ordinary citizen. I am from the generation who still remember socialist or communist time. And sometimes I see that today vocabulary in Brussels and in political elite is very much close to what we saw in general statement on internationalism during Congress of the party. So then when people didn't understood what their leaders are talking about. And here I have always in mind meeting when I was with President Havel, meeting Zbigniew Brzezinski and Madeleine Albright, who said that Europe will pay the price for underestimated demographic changes. What demography, and Madeleine Albright at religion, here she meant the spread of Islamism in Europe. I don't want to be excused for political correctness to be said that I am xenophobe, but that Europe will pay the price for this. And this is the aspect which I think if the European leaders will not address properly, and it seems they are scared to do it for different reasons, I think that we will see the race of extreme right and extreme left who really address this issue. They address it in their own way, but they addressed it. We talk, and I remember we had a visit of a British European European minister, it was in Stockholm Forum of Economics, who said that really we are capable to solve the issue like banking union, euro crisis, but the issue which in long term will be very important for Europe in 5-10 years is really the demography and the changes which it will bring. I do apologize, it's something like 3 minutes question.
You're still in 7 minutes, so it's fine. Thank you, Ambassador. That was a question to Mr. Tsoukalis, right?
Thank you for the question. Economic recovery is, I believe, a necessary but not sufficient condition to deal with the problems we're facing. I had 7 minutes, so I had to concentrate on what I believe to be the most immediate concern. Because without economic recovery, nothing else is going to come. I mean, with economic growth, you wash down all sorts of problems, but not all of them. Okay, so that is the first thing. But of course, you are absolutely right. Europe is facing a number of other challenges. There is, for example, a generational gap in many of our societies, which has to do with demography, but not only. Because in many of our countries, the young generation is inheriting high debt and low prospects for jobs. The combination is not very nice. And that explains why a large number of young people begin to vote with their feet or take a strong stance against our political systems domestically. Of course, the more vulnerable countries or the weaker politically, economically, socially are facing this problem on a much bigger dimension. The other is, of course, immigration. And there is no easy answer to that. I hear my economics, I started my life as an economist, I know nobody's perfect, but I hear my economics colleagues very often who do an economic balance sheet, and they explain the benefits of immigration. And of course I can understand that, especially in an aging society like the European society. But there are social and political dimensions as well. And when immigration goes above a certain threshold of tolerance of societies, then it has repercussions. And we see the repercussions not only in the weak economically countries, but in the Netherlands and in other places. So this is a real issue that we have to address, but I'm not suggesting that there are any simple answers. Perhaps if I may add another one, there's the other problem in our societies, growing inequalities. There is an increasing number of people in our societies who identify themselves as losers out of the whole long economic transformation. How do you deal with that? Is there a trade-off between competitiveness and social cohesion? And if there is, how do you address it? Not easy politically. So I'm not offering simple solutions, but at least let us recognize the problems.
Thank you. We had a question at the back.
Greek compatriot Loukas Tsoukalis was kind enough not to raise the specter for the Latvian presidency of a second or third Greek crisis in the south. If you remember the days of 2010 and then again of 2012, when the Greek crisis erupted, you had more than 2, maybe more than 3 summits and several Eurogroups going deep into the Greek crisis and shoving aside all other aspects of European discourse. But the real question, since I don't have 7, not even 3 minutes, the real question is an elite-led project, when it really believes in democracy and the democratic principle, in times of crisis or deflation, is it possible to talk about it? Or is it a figment of our imagination? Is Europe a reality or an imaginary project? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tsoukalis, do you want to respond?
I thought I wanted to spare you of the Greek crisis in my intervention. Of course, I mean, if you take Greece, Greece was a catalyst in the transformation of an international financial crisis into a European crisis. And some people in the beginning thought or wanted to believe that the Greek problem was a unique problem. So you try to deal with Greece and then you deal with the problem. We discovered afterwards, or some people discovered afterwards, that there is of course a Greek problem, there was an Irish problem, there was a Portuguese problem, there's a Spanish problem, but there's also a systemic problem of the Eurozone. They're both. There are both national failures and a systemic European problem. And you have to deal with both, and it's not easy. Yes, there is a risk that there's going to be another Greek crisis in the next few months because of the possibility of a changeover in government. But look at this very interesting phenomenon. You have at least 3 countries in Europe where the political parties that are leading the opinion polls are anti-systemic parties that are challenging the status quo. It is Greece, it is Spain, it is even the Republic of Ireland. In the Republic of Ireland, Sinn Féin is leading the opinion polls. If these are not signs of crisis, I don't know what else are you expecting to see.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, there is a hand at the back, I think, but yes, you. Miguel.
Miguel Diaz, U.S. Embassy. When I hear my European friends bemoan the high state of unemployment and the slow rate of economic growth, I never hear in the conversation the role of TTIP, which leads me to wonder whether the Europeans consider TTIP an opportunity or considers it a potential burden in terms of dealing with the present situation. So I'd like to get a sense from the panelists, to what extent are Europeans' problems seen as an opportunity for engagement with the U.S. and with TTIP in particular?
Thank you, Miguel, for the question. Lolita wants to respond to this first, and then I think also the other panelists, if you have comment on this, please, you're welcome to do that. Lolita?
Thank you very much. I will sound enthusiastic again, and this is because we Latvians are sometimes a little too pessimistic, because some people explain it by sheer lack of the sun. That's why we are a bit kind of melancholic, pessimistic, and I've just decided to drop it a few years ago. But it's a joke, of course. But yes, I am enthusiastic about TTIP too. Because as a Latvian, I see that it's not only a trade agreement. It's, of course, a broader agreement of a geopolitical space, being able to agree on something. It's a show of unity, solidarity, and common principles. And I think if we fail on TTIP now, then the conditions will be dictated by someone else and by other principles 10 years down the line. And that is talking about the younger and next generation, what world they will be living in. So yes, we are enthusiastic. We know there are problems with TTIP, of course. With every movement, with every treaty, every agreement, there are problems. There are issues, but I think they can be solved. And that actually brings me back to the point that I raised during the first round of interventions is the propaganda. And I think that when we look and analyze the narrative on TTIP, we sometimes see that there are a lot of stereotypes, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of wrong ideas being spread around. And of course, I'm not a believer in conspiracy theories, but sometimes, to me, it seems that there is probably few sources where this propaganda stereotypes comes from, because we also had a short debate on TTIP in our parliaments. And it was very peculiar to what extent there are really misbeliefs and misconceptions. Many people believe that we will be just flooded with low-quality food, and our children will be forced to eat it, and all kinds of really strange things. So we need to have thorough, detailed debates on this, but remain enthusiastic seeing the broader implications of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Lolita. Ramunas was also wanted to say something.
Yes, I think for the Baltic states and some other EU members, TTIP provides a hugely important opportunity to reduce this balance between very high importance of security relations with United States, I would say dependence on security provision by United States through NATO, and rather small economic relations with the United States as a trade partner, an investment partner. I think TTIP could increase the economic importance at the same time. Also, as it was, I think, rightly said, having geopolitical influence. I would also add that possibility to trade energy resources is seen as very important in this region. But if we talk about TTIP as an purely economic project, well, it is trade liberalization plus regulatory harmonization, and these processes are now meeting traditional obstacles which characterize any such agreement, meaning vested interests which might stand to lose from more competition. Also some public concerns, some of which are legitimate, some of which I think are misinformed. And these are the same reasons why I think there is a lack of structural reforms in some European Union member states. So if these interests are overcome in favor of general broad economic benefits, then TTIP will be signed. But I think it's at the moment by no means clear.
Thank you, Ramunas. Visnja?
Very briefly, well, I think this is the opportunity. I also look at this as the opportunity, and I don't think that European Union should be Eurocentric. I think this is an important step forward. However, I would underline that again, that this is also the question of competitiveness. US is among world highest competitors, so this might also be an additional push to implement reforms in Europe. And above all, this is wider agreement. This is, as it was mentioned, trade liberalization. This is not only goods, but also services. So it opens quite a lot of opportunities outside of Europe, which is important. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question. Mr. Zwaan? The microphone. Where is the microphone? And I think we should start collecting questions, because I see a hand over there, and there's another one. Okay, so we're going to collect 3 questions and then.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the economics aspect. Perhaps primarily I addressed the question to Loukas, but the others, of course, are also free to answer. In fact, when we started the economic project, we established the internal market, free movement, fundamental principle. We added the competition policy, but we realized, however, only after decades, that was enough to provide for equal conditions on the market. Funny enough, when we introduced the EMU, the Economic and Monetary Union, we started with the M, the single currency, and in order to manage the crisis, also with respect to having introduced the single currency, we have now added, and you focused on that, a common monetary policy, budget control, a banking union, and we are really focusing on these kinds of controlling aspects. But with regard to the E, and that's also a difficult narrative to explain to the ordinaries, shouldn't we do much more in the domain of the ordinary economic policies, income policies, employment policies, social security, taxation in a way, pension policy? I mean, it's a difficult story, because the reference is to the economic union. But if we are honest and fair with ourselves, shouldn't we also explain that in that direction some common policy has to be developed.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Thank you very much. My name is Kirill Avramov, and I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria, New Bulgarian University. I'm going to ask Professor Tsoukalis, as much as he has raised one of the major points, I believe. My brief question to him will be, how many bargains would it take to reconcile camps which are essentially led by different elites? Because from what I understand here, we're talking about grand bargain. How many of those bargains we can actually have in order to have them, given the fact that one of the camps actually is led by anti-systematic players, which definitely have something else in mind, and basically probably are thinking about different terms of that deal, of the bargain. And my second question will be to our Dutch colleague, which is there any alternative grand narrative beyond the two listed ones, given that when we have times of crisis and crisis feelings, it's just a natural twitch to centralize, but could we have something as a hybrid? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. One more question was over there. Yes, please. And then we're going to have the second round with your questions.
Thank you. I'm the ambassador of Norway, and we're not a member of the EU, but I'm glad I have given permission to speak. Very interesting that the two big priorities of the presidency is overcoming the financial crisis and also securing the security. And that is also a very good, this also affects areas all around neighboring countries to the north, east and south. But I see no mention of NATO here regarding the second priority, regarding the security issues. Most of the European countries, EU countries, sorry, are also a member of NATO, and there are parallel processes. Is the communication there? Does this panel have any views on if the communication between the EU and the NATO on common concerns is appropriate? Is it sufficient? This week, the foreign ministers of NATO gathered, many of them from the EU, and then the same foreign ministers are meeting to discuss security issues in other formats. So some reflections on this issue would be welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Although I think security issues, as well as previously already discussed TTIP, we're going to be discussing in detail a little bit later in different panels. But if I then may ask the panelists to respond to the questions, I wonder who's going to respond on the security question. Okay, Lolita, then it's your turn. Sure.
This is the opportunity to say something which is not on the topic today, and when I was thinking about the challenges and when I was thinking what is the security challenge from our perspective, I think this is to support, enlargement is not on the agenda now, this is clear, and this is a logical consequence of the previous development. So the region of Western Balkans will not be in the focus of this presidency and future presidencies. But I think this is also the security challenge. This is the challenge to support reform, to support both political and economic reform, because in this region there is now a situation that slowing down of reforms results with some kind of nationalism, and also opens the ground for the new players. You see the situation now with Russia, for example, and Serbia. So these are also the new political challenges, and I think also some countries which are very weak states might explode in the future. For example, I'm speaking about Bosnia, which will soon come to the Council discussion regarding this German-UK proposal, initiative, which I think is very good. So I think it is very important also to deal with this part of Europe. The focus is definitely on Ukraine, on Russia, on neighborhood countries, but I think we should not forget this part, because we might have some new political crisis. Thank you.
Okay, Lolita.
Yes, just really following on to this, in my opinion, very valuable point. It is indeed so that the enlargement as such, and also incentive for further integration in Europe is also a security question. And when we look at the West Balkans, it's very much the case. We see cases in the West Balkans where when the prospect of further integration with the EU was closer, it was somehow easier to mobilize. And when it when it loosens, then the mobilization is not there, and we see all these developments that you just described. So I really agree. And on general security issue, if we look in terms of NATO and military expenditure, I think that everyone knows that it's expensive, and therefore I very much support. We just recently reviewed the policy of pooling and sharing of the resources, and I think it's a very necessary development that in the broader European Union space, we really need to cooperate, to develop our niche abilities, and not try to cover with a small financing all areas. So I think it's very important, and of course it brings in NATO in the picture to a very large extent.
Thank you. Adriaan, you had a question from the colleague from the Bulgarian University on narratives. And is there another grand narrative possible?
Thank you. On the security question, though, I think it would be interesting to know what the German position really is and how it is developing. A year ago, I had the impression that Germany wanted to use the EU to become more active at the European defense or international level. Now I'm not quite sure where Germany stands, because I have the impression that because of the developments with Putin in particular, the German situation may be changing to the situation where, well, if everybody looks at us, we might as well do it. As regards the narrative question, yes, we have the discussion about centralization. I don't want to suggest that that's the only narrative that is going around. Some people still talk about the internal market, although that gets a little bit bleak. Is there a hybrid form? Well, the hybrid form is what sort of mix? I was talking about the role of the member states in the EU, and I think that is an almost forgotten dimension. And it seems to be pushed to the side. I think if we look at a hybrid situation, I think that is important that we look at the balance between the EU institutions and the national institutions. When I travel around the EU or have my discussions in the Commission and EU institutions, I discover a certain tiredness of member states. Who caused the banking crisis? Of course, the member states can't control their banks. Whatever field you touch, it's always the member states who cannot do it. So we cannot rely on the French figures. France has been very flexible in showing their growth figures over the last 2 years. Let's be frank about it. And, okay, we can ask DG ECFIN to come up with better growth figures, but that's not pressing any ownership back to the problematic countries, or all countries for that matter, because that's where you have to build up the national institutions. DG ECFIN cannot function without strong national institutions. So we need to really, and that's something that any presidency should have in mind, when the language is the Commission should, actually we have to have in mind the question of what do we actually mean? It is not the Commission who should monitor. It is not the Commission who should tell what to do, who should evaluate, who should come up with advice. It's the Commission who has to make sure that things happen with the member states, through the member states. I've been studying various crises, also as a consultant for the Commission in aviation policy and in food safety. We didn't create a food safety union. We just made sure that the member states were up to par with their national institutions and that they function in well-functioning European systems where the Commission has very specific roles. And that is the kind of perspective where we have first and second order control mechanisms. My neighbor was just saying that in many member states, the countries have a low self-esteem. That's true. 17 member states trust the EU institutions much more than they trust their national institutions. 17. So that just shows that we cannot look at EU institutions, but the real problems lies at the national institutions. So the hybrid is really about the composition of the responsibilities and the capabilities of the institutions, national and European. If we only talk about institutions and budgets, this EU will have a nice set of policies, but not a functioning administrative political system. And that is really where I think the EU is heading towards. I'm not so pessimistic economically about the future. I'm pessimistic about the EU in its ability to actually manage diversity on a collective basis. So the hybrid model, I think, of EU institutions, national institutions, is a very good and important question, also for the Latvian presidency.
Thank you. We have two more questions, which both were addressed to Mr. Tsoukalis, but I would ask still Ramunas to try to answer the question: should we do more in ordinary economic policies?
I would rather support the view of those who see the main issue being domestic policies of member states and not enough delivery by member states rather than systemic European Union action. We can see permanently unimplemented decisions, and we know that implementation is the responsibility of member states, with European Commission participating, as Adriaan nicely put it. So I think it's like without actually fully establishing the common market, we are already eager to move further and further and integrate new areas. I think the common market project is not finished yet. If we look into the services, if we look into some other areas, but I understand that this is due to the nature of politics, both domestic or national or European politics. Policymakers need all the time some new initiative. That's why you use compared to a bicycle, because it's a nature of politics. It should be moving all the time. And once you make a decision, you don't really care if it's implemented or not. Unfortunately, and I think that's the main problem. Sorry for
that was cynical. Mr. Tsoukalis, again, the same question about the more ordinary economic policies from Mr. Zwaan and from the colleague of Bulgarian University on how many bargains can we have?
Okay, perhaps I'll phrase my answer in three subsets. Number one, when we decided, rather our political leaders decided to create the common currency, for political reasons essentially, they decided to proceed with the common currency, but without endowing Europe with the instruments and institutions to make it viable. And then Europe was asked, in the midst of the storm, to redo the house, which has been a very painful and very difficult process. I believe, and I don't think it's a particularly idiosyncratic point of view, that no monetary union is viable in the long run unless it has a solid fiscal base and a legitimate political base on which to rest. Can we deliver both? It remains to be seen, because we've made some changes, but the changes are not enough. I can put it very bluntly, Euro governance as it stands today is neither effective nor legitimate. It can survive for some time, but I think it cannot survive for long. The tensions internally are enormous. Number two, bargains. Yes, we need a grand bargain to decide whether we can continue with monetary union. But remember that given the state of European integration, there is no longer one-size-fits-all integration model. To keep, for example, the UK in, we will have to give the UK more flexibility and more differentiation. So while the Eurozone needs more policy integration to survive, the UK needs less. So that means in the context of 28, we will be dealing with different models. And perhaps that's the way ahead. And if I may finish with the last question, because our Bulgarian colleague talked about anti-establishment parties and so on. Anti-establishment parties are the reflection of protest movements, and many of them have a strong populist character. I think it is a huge mistake to brand everything populist and dismiss it. We have to look for the causes of the rise of populist protest. And there are serious problems in our societies and our economies that unless we deal with them, we will have more protest.
Thank you. Thank you. We are quickly running out of time, although both of the clocks show different time, but we're working according to this. So I saw there are two more hands. There was this. Your hand is first, and then your hand is second. Two quick questions, please. Say whom you are addressing them to, and then because the coffee is already getting cold outside.
Thank you. Christoph Schewe. I'm working for the German Academic Exchange Service as associate professor at the University of Latvia, and for that reason, my question is not purely economical, but concerns the educational sector, and it's directed to Lolita Čigāne. I understand that education is also part of the suggestion to solve the problems that we've addressed before. And so Latvia has taken it on its agenda, but I guess you also know the study issued by the World Bank in 2013, which does not really, to put it nicely, recommend Latvia as the member state to address this issue. So, well, my question also not only for Europe, but also for Latvia. Do you think that you can also use it to push the educational sector, especially in the higher educational sector in Latvia? And yeah, I think I finished my question here. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And the second question?
Thank you very much. I'm the Belgian ambassador in Riga. I would just want to react perhaps to Mr. Schout. I think we all are in favor of responsible and strong national governments. Even the Commission, I think, will have nothing against it. But on the other hand, I think that more centralization, more European architecture and structure is just written in the genetic code of the European Union when it was created in the 50s. So we will have more centralization, and we better deal with it. And I think one way of how to deal with it, and it has also been touched upon Mr. Tsoukalis, is that we have indeed to go also to more economic union, more social union, and so on. But what our politicians have to do is to explain this to the population. We also always talk about this alienation from the citizen towards the European Union, but there's also kind of alienation, or you can call it schizophrenia, of our politicians. I explain myself is that when our ministers go to Brussels, they usually take the right decisions, and they decide on economic and monetary union, they decide on European semester and so on. So they take decisions on more centralization, more powerful and resilient Europe. But when they go home to their capitals and to their countryside, to their cities, they say that Europe has decided that, and that maybe it was not such a good idea, or definitely it was not a popular idea to do that, and it infringes on liberties or on choices of the citizen. But they will not, and very often not, defend what they have decided themselves in a responsible way in Brussels. And I think that will be one of the first steps to have a stronger, more credible and acceptable Europe to our population and the rest of the world. If this kind of schizophrenia in the heads of politicians could be altered or even ideally be stopped. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the last two comments, Lolita and then Adriaan.
Yes, education sector is a painful issue here in Latvia, and it has a very broad context to it. Definitely we have pockets of excellence, and we do have good examples, but we do face problems, and it was very well shown in the World Bank report. Here our colleague Ramunas talked about vested interests. And I think it's an issue of vested interests here, which is very difficult to overcome. And sometimes when that is an interest and that is the issue, the long-term vision is somehow blurred. That is one thing. Yes, I do hope that the presidency will give the necessary impetus to overcome it, especially in the higher education. When we talk about the general education, it's, for us, it's also a question of regional developments. development, because Latvia is a very sparsely populated country. We are the size, the Netherlands is 1/3 smaller than Latvia, but you have 17 million, we have 2 million. So we have a beautiful countryside, but sometimes you can walk on for 2 weeks not meeting people. Maybe 2 weeks is an exaggeration, but 3 weeks, 3 days definitely. You could just take a boat, go down the river and not meet anyone apart from hares, wildlife, and so on. So it's the reality. And in many small local villages, the local school is the center of activity, the center of life, basically. And it's a question that we need to balance. Giving good quality education to the few village children, or closing down the school and basically then determining that the village will be most likely wiped off the map. So, yes, it's an interest of vested interests, but also it's a question of vested interests, but also a broader question of how we will be developing in future, given the challenges that I mentioned.
Thank you, Lolita. Adriaan?
Yes, well, a nice quote. Centralization is in the cards. Deal with it. I will be happy to repeat that sentence. The quote, centralization is in our DNA. Deal with it. You see, from a logical perspective, centralization will never work, and I have an organizational background. Centralization always goes together with decentralization. If it doesn't, it fails. So centralization is a logical wrong term. You always have centralization, decentralization at the same time. So centralization, deal with it, that's not going to work. But you see, it has to do with ownership. It has to do with richness of information. It has to do with implementation, with follow-up, with mutual monitoring, etc. All these systems that we are insufficiently putting on the agenda, and therefore things are failing. Thanks to our Finnish colleagues from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, we had a very intimate lunch with a senior commission official, and he was telling us bluntly, the Stability and Growth Pact is dead for the coming month. This commission is not going to do anything about it. Because what can you tell the Italians? You know, you have to cut your budget with 3%. No, nobody's going to do that. The French situation, the same. We can have measures, and we have measures. We have this beautiful Stability and Growth Pact, and now it's put on the fridge for the second time, crucially. And the problems are the member states and the national institutions. So I would say decentralization should be on the cards, unless you cannot deal with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriaan. Well, I guess this is a time for me to summarize all this, and I'm just wondering how to do that. I will just